Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we can get started. Is it? You can't? It's on, it's just not loud enough. Oh, it's on, but it's not loud enough. Can you hear me now? My God, I sound like a Verizon commercial. Can you hear me now? Let me give you just two little notices before this begins. One is that this event is being videotaped, both by UCLA and by outside media, just so you know. And the second thing is, if any of you are tweeters, UCLA privacy is the hashtag. Please go ahead. We encourage you, in fact, to tweet. So with that, good afternoon again. I'm Kenwada, UCLA's Chief Privacy Officer, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event today. It's going to be fantastic. We actually heard James Bamford last night at the Hammer, so I can already tell you it's going to be fantastic. But I'm doing double duty and welcoming you also on behalf of UCLA and the Office of Information Technology. Jim Davis, who's the Vice Provost for Information Technology at UCLA, sadly was unable to attend today, and believe me, he was very disappointed when he found out about the calendaring conflict. This afternoon, though, is actually a very special event for me and for several other people in this room, because we've been all part of the UCLA Privacy Board, the UCLA Board on Privacy and Data Protection, and this month marks the 10th anniversary of the board. Christine Borgman, who is professor Professor and Presidential Chair in Information Studies, I should know that, is uniquely positioned to talk about the board and its long history and also the history of privacy and UCLA, and we're going to have her talk about that. She's been a major driver of all of the privacy efforts on our campus. We're also fortunate to have Joel Auerbach, the UCLA Chair of the Academic Senate here, and also Distinguished Professor of Political Science and Public Policy to introduce our guest speaker today. James Bamford, of course, who I actually did a Google search this morning. It came up with almost 1 million results. Strangely enough, it looks like you have a double, a stunt coordinator from Canada, who I couldn't distinguish how many of those million were related to him as opposed to you, but nevertheless, not an unknown name we have here. So I hope you'll be able to stay a little bit after James finishes his talk in the Q&A and join us for a little bit of 10th anniversary birthday cake, essentially, outside, and also to thank the library for providing us with this space, and also to Kelly Aruda in my office, who has once again managed to make this all happen. Thank you very much, and let me pass this to Christine.
Thanks, Kent, my co-conspirator for quite a while now at UCLA. My roles here, as Kent said, are multiple. It was back in 2003 that I proposed the formation of the Board on Privacy and Data Protection, because the issues were already beginning to swamp the only 3-year-old Board on Information Technology and Planning. And during that time, I got very involved in other organizations, and I'm now a member of the Board of Directors of EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, based in Washington, D.C., which has been very helpful to UCLA in these years that we've been working. Now, this is not only our 10th anniversary, but it's a 30th anniversary of welcoming Jim Bamford back to UCLA. My first talk as an assistant professor here in 1984 was on a panel that Jim gave. He was the keynoter with Puzzle Palace, and it was called the Global Network Conference. And we both remember it well, and he said a number of other people who were there, it's influenced their career. I think it also suggests how long UCLA has been interested and concerned with privacy issues. But it was another 10 years after that 1984 event that EPIC was founded in 1994. Several UCLA faculty have been on that advisory board. Jim is on that advisory board, and we see each other regularly in that role. And then in 2005, as Kent said, is when we established this board as a joint academic senate and university administration. This board and the IT planning board are the only two boards like this where we really have the faculty and the administration, and we've got the academic council, we've got the chief security officer, chief privacy officer, and number of faculty all working together. We are in a sense, the keeper of privacy expectations for the campus. We consider issues that have positive and sometimes very negative consequences that we may have to deal with around education, research, or service. But we bring together these different perspectives. We have built an institutional memory, and we often identify problems that are on the border of privacy, confidentiality, human subjects, technical security, and others come up. So building on established privacy principles, we have to balance things where there's legal obligations, administrative obligations, and things that may confront some of our values around things like privacy, academic freedom, and security. The UCLA Board also played a major role in the UC-wide Privacy and Information Security Initiative charged by then-President Mark Yudof, and in the end we modeled the UC-wide approach on the UCLA Board, which was the first board of its kind of any higher education institution in the U.S. We now have a chief privacy officer at all 10 campuses and boards. They've all been invited, and a representative from Oakland, from UCOP, has come down to be here with us today. Just a few of the milestones that we've dealt with. The Bruin card was the first thing that we faced as a brand new universal ID for this campus. We had questions of what can be collected, who can see it, what kind of security and controls, who should have access to it when it's everything from a library card to a monetary card. MySpace in the dorms was very new. Dana remembers that well, is what can you collect, what do you advise the students about revealing about themselves. We had stalking issues. We had people that wanted to, the research, the dorm staff that thought they should be able to see whatever the students posted on their pages. Those were fun to deal with. Kent and I have had many amazing experiences face-to-face with the movie and recording industries. We are very convenient when it comes to talk about things like illegal file sharing. And we have enforced the UC-wide electronic communications policy that says we do not monitor. And we have enforced that against great challenges of people who would like to come and just attach to our network and say, well, we'll monitor for you. And we've said, no, thank you very much, you won't. Okay, but those have been interesting times. We dealt with the data breach in 2006. We wish we'd been around a few years earlier to have prevented that particular breach. But it was very interesting. And we're continuing to deal with issues like cameras in public spaces. When is that human subjects? When is it security? Who should be allowed to put a camera up and why, and who should have access to it? Access to student records, access to faculty personnel records, and now we're dealing with things like how do you balance the requirements of funding agencies for faculty to release their data with university obligations to protect some of those data. So there's just many more of these coming down the line. But in sum, this is the most exciting and interesting and important academic senate and university committee I have ever served on. And I hope we can excite you about some of these issues, get you engaged. We're always recruiting more faculty and more students to participate on these boards and bring our issues to us also. With that, let me turn it over to Joel Aberbach, who's going to introduce Jim for the day, and we will have a very rich discussion and a reception thereafter. Thank you.
Well, as you said, I'm Joel Aberbach, and I'm this year's Academic Senate Chair. It's an honor for me to introduce James Bamford. He's, as you know, a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine, as well as an American best-selling author, journalist, and documentary producer for PBS. His most recent book, The Shadow Factory, the ultra-secret NSA from 9/11 to the eavesdropping on America, became a New York Times bestseller and was named by the Washington Post as one of the best books of the year. It is the third in a trilogy by Mr. Bamford, following The Puzzle Palace and Body of Secrets, both of which were New York Times bestsellers. In 2005, he released A Pretext for War, 9/11, Iraq, and the Abuse of America's Intelligence Agencies, an examination of the intelligence community from the attacks of September 11th to the war in Iraq. And this was also a bestseller. He's written for the New York Review of Books, the New York Times Magazine, the Atlantic, Harper's, Rolling Stone, and many other publications. He won the National Magazine Award in 2006 for reporting, the highest honor in the magazine industry, for his writing in Rolling Stone on the war in Iraq. And last September, he wrote a cover story for Wired magazine based on his 3 days in Moscow with fugitive NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. He's currently working on a new documentary for PBS on cyber warfare, which is scheduled to air later this spring. He holds a Juris Doctor degree, was awarded a Polymer Fellowship at Yale Law School, and has taught at the University of California, Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy as a distinguished visiting professor. So it's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Bamford back to UCLA. It's kind of, I guess, poetic that 1984 was the last visit. And we're all looking forward to his talk and to the discussion afterwards. Welcome to UCLA.
Yes, it's there.
Oh, okay, thanks. I got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, great. Well, listen, it's really great to be back here after all these years. As I was telling Christine earlier, that when I was back here 30 years ago or so, the NSA was much different from then. I used to drive up to the front door of NSA and park my car and walk into the lobby, sit down, have a cup of coffee, and read a newspaper. Nobody even asked who I was. And now you can't get within 5 miles of the place without somebody pulling out a semi-automatic or something. It's an enormous change from the days when I first started writing about NSA to today. So I really appreciate Christine and Ken and Kelly and Joel having me here, and it's really great being here. I gave a talk in Hamburg at the Chaos Computer Conference a couple weeks ago. 12,000 hackers, which was amazing. But it was freezing cold, and then I gave a talk last week at the JFK Library in Boston, which was freezing cold, and then I gave a talk at Northwestern in Chicago over the weekend, and it was freezing cold, so this is like heaven. This is nirvana for me. Well, you know, what I was going to talk about today is a little bit about NSA, what I was doing when I met Snowden in Moscow, and how NSA has really grown in the last 30 years. So let me get to a few of these slides here. This is Ed Snowden and I in Moscow. I interviewed him for a cover of Wired magazine last summer. I spent 3 days hanging out with him. Really quite amazing. It was a little bit difficult getting to see him at first because although it had all been arranged, I wasn't told where or when I was going to meet him when I landed in Moscow. I was just told to go to a certain place, bring a book, start reading the book, and he would find me. So I don't usually get involved in too many clandestine things, but this was really sort of one of the more James Bond things I've been involved in. But it was amazing seeing him, and I was astounded at how articulate he was. He was just amazing when I was interviewing him, how much he knew about what NSA was doing and how it impacted on the privacy of everybody's lives, which is one of the reasons he decided to become a whistleblower. One of the things, we had a few things in common, which was kind of interesting. Snowden was in Hawaii at a secret NSA facility, and I spent 3 years in the Navy during Vietnam, and I was at a secret NSA facility in Hawaii. So, and there's my motorcycle gang there back in those days. And then after Hawaii, I went to law school. That's when I had more hair there. And while I was in law school, I stayed in the Navy Reserves. So they would send me on occasion to do 2 weeks active duty. And at one point, they sent me to this interesting place here. It was a listening post in Sabana Seca, Puerto Rico. And when I was down there, I was very surprised because I knew that they eavesdropped on South America and Central America, and I was just there for 2 weeks. A lot of people with earphones on, and then one day somebody called me over and said, "Oh, you want to listen to something interesting?" And I said, "Well, I don't really speak Spanish very well, so it's not going to be much use." And they said, "No, it's English. You could understand that." And so I put the earphones on. They were Americans speaking to each other, which I thought was rather odd. And I was a student prosecutor back in law school. I got back to Boston, and I thought it was odd because we needed a search warrant. We needed different kinds of warrants if we wanted to actually listen to people. So I decided I was going to become a whistleblower, and I actually blew the whistle on NSA to the Church Committee, which was being formed, the committee formed by Senator Church to look into the abuses of the intelligence community. By the way, this is I couldn't get a picture in there, but I sort of made up what it looked like inside the listening post there. You see George and Barack sort of got their start there too. So when I was in there listening to these Americans, what it was as part of this program called Minaret. And that was done by the Nixon administration that started it. And basically they were looking at very, very dangerous people like Jane Fonda and now this is a really dangerous character, Dr. Benjamin Spock. He's got his weapon there with him. Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King. So that was the beginning of NSA's eavesdropping on telephone calls in the United States, Project Minaret. So the Church Committee was listening to, hearing testimony from people from NSA. The NSA actually told the Church Committee that they had stopped doing that a year and a half earlier. So then when I called up, they asked me to come down to Washington the next day when I called up and said that they're still doing it. And so I told Frank Church, the senator, and he really did kind of flip out. So he decided to check it out. He sent a crew down to some of the staffers down to Puerto Rico to look into the listening post. They all flew down there on a surprise inspection. Well, it caught the station chief and a lot of the people that worked there by surprise. So they took off as fast as they could. But what it was interesting to me was that it was the first time that I realized that a federal agency, especially one as big as NSA and as important as NSA, could actually lie to a congressional committee. So they didn't want the committee to know that they were still doing it. They said they stopped it a year and a half earlier. And so that made an impact on me. And so instead of going into law, I decided to become a writer and write the very first book on NSA. And when I was doing that, one of the things I came across was this document here. And it was really surprising to me. It's surprising to most people. I never really talked much about it. I quoted from it in my first book. But Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras asked me to write a piece about it for their publication called The Intercept a few months ago. And what it was a very secret investigation that the Justice Department did in around 1975, 76, where they actually did a criminal investigation of NSA. It's the first and only time that I've ever heard of that an entire agency was looked at as a potential criminal enterprise, like a mafia or a RICO investigation. They actually read the Miranda rights to the senior officials at NSA. And they found 20 areas where they could possibly prosecute. Some of those were eliminated because of the statute of limitations, but other ones they could still prosecute on. So it was really a criminal investigation of NSA for doing illegal eavesdropping. It was really unheard of, and this was very, very secret at the time. They decided to drop the case because they felt that in a court of law there would it'd be almost impossible to get these people to actually testify because all the information was so secret. But anyway, it was very interesting the fact that they actually did a criminal investigation of NSA spying. And the bottom line was they said that we can't take it into court, it'd be too secret, so we'll just have to let the executive branch and the Congress deal with the issues. But my book came out, The Puzzle Palace, the first book on NSA. And a lot of people in NSA weren't very happy about it. They were, I took some pictures of them. They were rather upset. I don't know why. I mean, but anyway, this is where it all began. It's called the Black Chamber. That was where NSA started, that building there. It's a 4-story townhouse in Manhattan, and the first floor was sort of a cover. They pretended to make commercial codes. The next 2 floors were where they did the actual interception or the code breaking and so forth. And the top floor was where Herbert Yardley, the chief of the Black Chamber, lived. So that's where it all started, very small back in 1920, and here it is today. It's an entire city. I mean, it's literally a city, 32 miles of road and so forth. So it's gigantic agency now, largest intelligence agency in the world, and its headquarters here, you could put the U.S. Capitol in there 4 times over. It's just, this is really a monument to eavesdropping. I was given a tour through there a few times, actually, but I wasn't allowed to take pictures, so again, I had to sort of make it up and see what, some average Americans here speaking on their telephone, and that's the NSA inside monitoring them. So what happened was after 9/11, George Bush decided to bypass the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which is a violation of the criminal statutes, 5 years in prison, and do warrantless eavesdropping. And the person that was in charge of doing the actual eavesdropping was Keith Alexander. He was the director of the NSA at the time. And his idea was to collect it all. And it was a program called Stellar Wind. The idea was to collect the entire haystack, collect everything, and then search through it, at your leisure, pretty much. So it was an enormous change for NSA. NSA was never created to do any of this stuff. Nothing was even imagined that NSA would be doing this. It was created for one purpose, to sort of focus on the Soviet Union and prevent another surprise attack, this time a nuclear attack by the Russians. So they circled the Russian landmass and its satellite countries with listening posts. And they could focus exactly where they wanted, because the Russian military spoke on particular channels, the Russian Air Force spoke on certain channels, the Navy spoke on certain channels, so they just target those channels. It wasn't really that hard. They just they found the frequencies, they knew the frequencies, and they focused on those. After the end of the Cold War, the NSA was kind of lost for a mission. The Soviet Union it wasn't there anymore. It was Russia, which was more of an ally than an adversary. And then, so they're looking for a mission, and they decided to do counterterrorism, which is not what it's designed for. When you're looking at the Russians, you're targeting specific channels of communications. When you're looking for terrorists, the decision was to monitor everything, all the communications, because you never know what channel they're going to be talking on, what form of communication. So again, the idea here was to collect it all. So this is the way NSA pretty much goes about it. First of all, there's all these satellites in space, communications satellites. There's lots of them up in geostationary orbit that circle the world, or that actually stay in geostationary orbit and monitor relay communications, telephone communications, email, and so forth. So NSA's put a number of very large listening posts around the world with all these antennas hidden in the domes, and they're all targeted at different communication satellites. So this is pretty much what these satellites look like in space. They're just giant parabolic antennas. and they've got them all over the world. This is one of the top secret slides from Ed Snowden, showing where a lot of the what they call foreign satellite communication, intercepting foreign communications is. They've got them in quite a few places, and they're enormously powerful. They pull up to about 2 million pieces of communications an hour, and you've got all those listening posts around the world, so you're talking about enormous amounts of communication. Also, microwaves. You drive around town, you see all these horns and dishes and so forth, and everything going in and out of that is communications, emails, telephone calls, everything. A lot of it is local communications because it gets relayed to other towers and then goes to wherever the destination is. So NSA, in order to intercept these communications, what they do is they have, again, these big dishes in geostationary orbit, because since the Earth is curved and these signals, these microwave signals, travel in a straight line, eventually they just go off into deep space at speed of light. So you've got the satellites up there that can eavesdrop on the on all the microwaves. Another area that they wanted to focus on was undersea cables. When the internet came along in the mid-90s, there was an enormous change in telecommunications because all of a sudden all these people were using international communications that hadn't been using it before. So it began overloading the satellites, and a lot of companies began building more and more undersea cables. And to some degree, that was very good for NSA, and to some degree, it wasn't. On the good part, NSA could monitor enormous amounts of communications. If you look at Brazil, for example, right there, and I actually gave the president of Brazil asked me to come down to give a briefing to her on what NSA's capabilities are in terms of their eavesdropping on Brazilian communications, and I just showed him this slide here. And what it shows is that all these cables that go in and out of Brazil, out of all that, only one goes someplace other than the United States. So they all go to the United States, and that's pretty much how everything is. If you can see there's so much communications that transit the United States in terms of cables. United States is in a perfect position to eavesdrop on so much undersea communications, which is the vast bulk of communications these days. The only problem with that is, and this is pretty much how they do it here. These are thin fibers. This is fiber optics, so it's optical fibers, and it's photons that go through there as opposed to electrons. And so what they do is they cut the cable and then put sort of a Prism device. This is actually a top secret slide, another one from Snowden. I didn't make this up. And the signal goes through the Prism, creates multiple channels out of one, and so that creates the ability for NSA to tap into some of those cables. And this is where it does it. It's this building here on the right is AT&T's Switch. It's about a 10-story building in San Francisco. It's where most of the communications for the Northwest go in and out. And because it's a key hub for the exchange of communications, cell phone, telephone, all sorts of communications, the NSA built a secret room in there, and that's what that orange door is. That's NSA's secret room, and inside the room they have all this equipment. It's called NARIS equipment, made by a company called NARIS, which is now owned by Boeing. And what it does is it filters all that communication. So anytime you send an email or make a phone call or whatever, it goes into that room, and if there's software in there and if it has your name in it, James Bamford or whatever, it will kick out that piece of communication, that email or whatever. It could be an email address, a name, a phrase, whatever they're looking for. All the rest would just sort of disappear. The one floor above is where the communications go to where it's normally supposed to go. Then the information, one copy of it goes downstairs, and if your name isn't in there, it just disappears. If your name is in there, then it goes directly to NSA. So those are the cables that sort of transit the United States, and the NSA got permission with secret agreements with these telecom companies to actually tap into those cables. But some of those cables don't actually go through the United States. Some of them actually go from one country to another country without transiting the U.S. So the U.S. built a submarine, the USS Jimmy Carter. I'm not sure if he would have agreed with that kind of use for a submarine, but they cut it in half and put basically a NSA listening post in the center of it. And so the object of the USS Jimmy Carter is to go down onto those cables and then tap into the cables undersea. And this is an actual photo of an undersea tap the NSA created. This was for a cable under the Sea of Irkutsk in Russia, and there was a defector from NSA who actually, not a defector, but a person who was committing espionage at NSA, who told the Russians about this, and so they brought it up from under the ocean, and now it's on display in a museum in Moscow. So, but that's an example of how complex some of these cables are, these cable taps are. So, in addition to all the other kinds of communications, the internet was an enormously important focus of NSA. So what they did was they created a number of programs. One of them was called Prism, and that was a secret agreement with the telecom companies, the Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, and so forth. And this is another top secret slide from Snowden. And you can see the little yellow circles there indicate when a company, particularly when a company decided to cooperate with NSA. Started with Microsoft and kept going on. So you've got pretty much the entire internet community that's agreed to cooperate with NSA. I mean, this wasn't volunteered on their part. The NSA came to them and said, do it or else, pretty much, and then don't say anything about it. So it was an agreement, but the NSA pretty much forced it on them, and with severe penalties if they ever revealed the fact that they were getting this front door access. Front door means that they're going in to the front with some kind of a FISA warrant or something, and demanding, you know, all James Bamford's communications or all the communications going to a particular place or country or whatever. But then there's also a backdoor access that NSA has. That way they don't have to actually go to the front door and say we have a legal warrant or whatever. They could get it without a warrant. And the way they did that was if you send Google, press a little button on your computer to send a Google search to Google, it'll go in encrypted form. It'll be encrypted, which makes it a bit difficult for NSA. That's why they have that front door telling the companies to give them the data. But what the companies did was when they were actually transferring information from one database to another, particularly even overseas, that wasn't encrypted. That was unencrypted. And so somebody at NSA had a really good idea. You can see they drew a little smiley face there. That will tap into those communications, and then nobody will know about it. So that was Operation Muscular, this backdoor access. Another one is metadata. So the NSA, every time you make a phone call, every time you get a phone call on your cell phone or whatever, there's a record of it being kept by NSA. It's been that way ever since 2001. So that however many phone calls you've made since 2001, the NSA has a record of all those. It's called metadata. It's not the content, but who you called and who called you, time of day, and all that is all being kept by NSA. So after you collect all that, where does it all go? Well, what the NSA did was they just finished about a year ago. This is a cover story I did for Wired on Bluffdale. That's where NSA puts it all. It's this enormous 1 million square foot data center in Bluffdale, Utah, largest data center in the world. And that's where they store all this information. It's sort of the NSA's external hard drive. The NSA can access that from headquarters. It's just like basically like a hard drive. They have very secure fiber optic cables going from there to the NSA headquarters and all the NSA facilities around the country. Well, once you've got it all, collected it all, stored it all, you still have to go through it all. So that's why they built this. They're actually in the process. I think they'll finish it in the next year or so. They're building this enormous computer down in Tennessee at the Oak Ridge National Lab. That's the same place that they built the some of the nuclear or atomic weapons excuse me, back in World War II. And the idea here is to get the computer to get up to exaflop speed, which is an enormous speed, a quintillion operations a second, billion operations a second. So they have all that data, and they could go through all that data. If you're looking for a name or a word or a phrase or an email address, they could go all through all that million square foot of data collection in a very quick time, a quintillion operations a second, go through a quintillion documents in a second. So the question is, you know, they're collecting all this stuff, and is there just too much hay? You know, they're collecting everything. That was the whole idea after 9/11 was, we'll collect everything, and then we'll search through it all. The problem is that the track record hasn't been really great. They missed the first World Trade Center. They missed the first attack on the World Trade Center, missed the USS Cole. They missed the attack on the embassies in East Africa. On 9/11, the director was having a meeting in his office, and he happened to look over at his TV to see a plane go into the World Trade Center. So he learned about it not from all his billions and billions of dollars of equipment, but from a $300 television set. They missed the attempted bombing in Times Square, missed the underwear bomber, missed the marathon bomber, and Paris bombing. I mean, I could probably add that to it, or the Paris attack. The success rate, the NSA first came out and they said, well, look, we've had 54 successes here. We've been able to stop 54 terrorist events. The problem is, by the time they got to holding their hand up and swearing under oath the truth, it didn't really come down to that. It came down to one incident, and that was the this taxi driver in San Diego that they found was sending $8,000 to some group in Somalia. And that's the one success that they had in all that collection of metadata for the ever since 2011, the billions and billions and billions of communications they're collecting every time you make a phone call. But they're still collecting it. They're not. There's been a move in Congress to try to end the collection of that metadata, but it hasn't gone very far, and they're still collecting it, even though it's virtually useless. So how are we protected now? The protections come basically from a couple sources. One is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISA Court, which is made up. It's a very secret court, obviously. Even the location is supposed to be secret, although it's on the 3rd floor of the federal courthouse in Washington. And not many people have actually been in to see the court in operation, in action. I did get a shot in there, though. But you can see they've had 33,900 surveillance requests, and you can see how diligent they are. They actually turned down 11 of them. But when these get turned down, they get another bite at the apple, because there is another very secret court that nobody's ever heard of called the Foreign Intelligence Court of Review. So they go up there, and they've never turned the government down. But even if they do, the government has a third bite at the apple. They can go to an in-camera secret session of the Supreme Court for another hearing. So the odds of actually getting turned down on a warrant request are almost impossible. Oh, and then we're protected by the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. You can see that's the position they were taking when they were looking into whether the NSA was eavesdropping on the U.S. They sort of missed the warrantless eavesdropping activity that was going on. So those are the two things that protect us from the NSA. But in reality, this is who I have to depend upon to protect us. So the whistleblowers, because they're the only ones that actually try to tell what's really going on. Bill Benny was a 40-year employee of NSA, very senior official. He created the whole NSA automating NSA's eavesdropping activity around the world. And he quit, as I said, after about 40 years when he found out that NSA was turning what he created domestically. And then Tom Drake was a whistleblower and leaked some information to the Baltimore Sun about what was going on at NSA. And the NSA, and he was a senior official also, and the NSA charged him with 5 counts of espionage. They spent 4 years trying to bring him to trial. They finally bankrupted him. He had to get a public defender. And then as they were preparing for trial, they hired me as a legal consultant for the case. And we were very lucky because I was able to find enough kind of loopholes. Basically, all the information they were charging him with, I was able to show that was in the public domain, but not only in the public domain, but put in the public domain by the government itself. So when we showed that to the judge and the prosecutor, they dropped the case. They basically threw the entire case out. And so he walked out of court with just a conviction for a misdemeanor without any jail time and no fine. In other words, less than a parking ticket. So he went from 5 counts of espionage down to a parking ticket. But this administration, the Obama administration, has used the power of prosecution against leakers more than any, 3 times more than any other president. And then Kirk Whitby was another senior official who left with Bill Benny, and then Chelsea Manning, and of course Ed Snowden and so forth. So the whistleblowers are where we're getting the information, not from the protections of the FISA Court and the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. So what's the takeaway on all this? Well, for one thing, the NSA's had the cooperation of the telecom companies going all the way back to the Black Chamber, almost 100 years. And occasionally they get caught, like they got caught during the 1975 era where it was Senator Frank Church and his church committee. They got caught this time. They've been caught a number of times. But the problem is, after they get caught, they stop for a while, but they always resume the illegal activity. And it is illegal. I mean, this is a violation of the law, and nobody ever gets punished for it. So what's the what's the answer to all this? One of the things is have a major church-style investigation. It worked back in the 70s, mid-70s. They really uncovered a great deal of illegal activities that NSA was doing. And they actually came up with some corrective measures. I mean, the FISA Court, as bad as it is, was at least one measure of positive action that came out of the church committee. Another thing is to have a big hearing where you have all the people from the telecom companies come in and testify exactly what they've been doing, what kind of cooperation they've been giving, what they've been asked for, and so forth. This also happened in the mid-70s. A woman by the name of Bella Abzug, one of the biggest terrors in Congress, had a major hearing, and the Ford administration was doing everything to prevent the hearing from taking place. They didn't want these telecom executives to sit in front of an open hearing and testify. So for the first time in history, and maybe the only time, the President Ford issued a executive privilege to private companies, saying you don't have to testify under executive privilege. Well, the companies were more afraid of Bella Abzug than they were of President Ford. You really had to meet her to understand that. So they showed up and they actually did testify, which was kind of amazing, and they did lay out what happened. So there are precedents for a lot of this stuff. The third thing, the Justice Department begin another full-blown criminal investigation. That's what I mentioned earlier they did in the mid-'70s. They had a full-blown criminal investigation. They read the Miranda rights to the senior officials at NSA. They spent a year looking into it. They came up with 20 different areas where they could possibly prosecute and so forth. So all these things have precedents. And finally, this doesn't have a precedent. They could prosecute somebody once in a while, you know, instead of just whistleblowers. They could prosecute people that lie in front of Congress, like the director of national intelligence, James Clapper, or General Alexander, who lied before Congress and also violated the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So I had a little dream that one day that they will actually prosecute General Alexander for doing these things. I had a lot of fun putting these little bars in front of him there. I mean, these are violations of the law. They're going after the people that are blowing the whistle, but not after the people who are actually doing the bad thing. So, you know, sometimes prison sentences do help. They turn people into good civilized citizens again. So I'm hopeful that that would happen to General Alexander. You know, and he'll come out and he'll have a change of heart about Snowden. And then eventually, Snowden will be on the Cryptologic Hall of Fame. It's interesting, I could see him right next to Herbert Yardley. Herbert Yardley was the first head of the Black Chamber, but he was also the first whistleblower at NSA. He actually wrote a book about what he was doing in the Black Chamber, and they threatened him with prosecution a number of times. But 70 years later or so, they actually put him on the Cryptologic Hall of Fame. So there is some hope for Snowden. So where does NSA go from here? This is kind of the future for NSA. It's cyber warfare. I'm actually doing a documentary for PBS on this topic right now. I did a documentary for PBS on NSA's domestic eavesdropping about 2 years before Snowden. So we're doing this one here on cyber warfare, and I actually interviewed Snowden also on camera for an hour about cyber warfare, because people don't realize it. But his last job at NSA, that's what he did. He was a cyber warrior, and so it's pretty fascinating. PBS has just released the 25-page transcript of my interview with him, and I think a 4-minute shot of the 4-minute video of my on-camera interview, and the actual program is coming out later this year. But this is where NSA is going. This new organization up here is the United States Cyber Command. That's being built right next to NSA right now. It's basically being part of NSA. The director of NSA wears a number of hats. He wears 3 hats. He's director of the National Security Agency. He's chief of the CSS, Central Security Service, which is the military that works with NSA. And now he's also commander of Cyber Command. He's, for the first time, a 4-star general. Or now he's actually an admiral, the person who took over. But that's the whole idea now, is that NSA is moving into the whole world of cyber warfare. What people, I don't think, realize, you hear Cyber Command, you think that, oh, good, well, they're out there protecting us. Cyber Command has nothing to do with protecting you from cyber attacks. Cyber Command has one job. That's to, actually has 2 jobs, but its main job is to create an offensive cyber capability. In other words, to attack, not to defend. The only thing that Cyber Command defends is the government system, the military's communications. It has nothing to do with protecting your communications. So the strategy here is completely dominance. Every time you pick up something from Cyber Command, and Cyber Command now has its own military. They have their own cyber army, the cyber navy, and a cyber air force. And the whole idea of Cyber Command is dominance. Every time, as I mentioned, you pick something up, it's dominance, information dominance, which means dominating the internet in the same way that the The cyber Navy wants to dominate the internet in the same way that the Navy of years, decades, and centuries ago would dominate the high seas. And the same thing, the Air Force would dominate cyberspace the same way they dominate air and space and so forth. So this whole idea now is to dominate the internet. And the U.S. was the very first and only country in the history of the world to launch what's known as a kinetic cyber attack. That means a destructive cyber attack. It doesn't mean that they're just wiping out your hard drive or something. I mean, that happens a fair amount. Or stealing information, that happens all the time. But this is, Stuxnet was when the NSA and the CIA and the Israelis created this cyber weapon to go after the centrifuges in Iran that were in a large cave, basically, in Iran. The centrifuges were used for nuclear enrichment. And so they got a virus in there. It was called Stuxnet, and it destroyed, it didn't just wipe out a computer. What it did was physically destroy the centrifuges. So it was the first time anybody's ever destroyed a physical object using cyber. And that is sort of the wave of the future. Even the NSA's recognized that. One of the speeches that General Alexander gave said, this is going to be the wave of the future, kinetic, destructive cyber attacks. And the U.S. is leading the way, as it does many times. This is one of the ways that they have to start putting it all together. In order to actually launch a cyber attack anywhere in the world, first of all, you have to know what everything in the world is that's connected to. So every time you make a cell phone call or get on your computer, you're making a link to the internet, obviously. And that's what, and this is another top secret slide that came from Snowden. This isn't something I came up with. This is, again, an NSA top secret slide. And the whole idea was this project called Treasure Map, or Operation Treasure Map. And the whole idea here was to map the entire internet, any device, anywhere, all the time, which means your cell phones or anybody's cell phones or anybody's computer. Every device in the world, map the whole thing, map the whole world. So that's one of the things they're doing right now is network reconnaissance and so forth, mapping the entire world, everybody's cell phone, until they'll have everybody's cell phone linkage into the internet, whether it's cell phone, or computer, or whatever. So the second thing, after you've mapped the complete internet in terms of all the devices to it, the next thing you have to actually plant malware all over the place. This is another top secret slide. The yellow dots, the other dots here, the blue ones are where they're tapping into cables, for example. The orange dots are where they're pulling down the satellite communications. The yellow dots are CNE. That stands for Computer Network Exploitation. It means that's where they planted malware around the world in order to get access to communications. But you're not only just getting access to communications, you can do whatever you want once that malware is in there. You could use it to drain information, to spy, to pick up information, or you can use it to destroy something. It can be used either way, as a weapon or as a spying tool. And what's interesting is you don't see, it's obviously a lot in China there, North Korea, but there's a lot in Europe. There's Brazil and much of at least northern South America is filled with malware. I mean, these are our friendly countries, and we put malware all over the place. Now, what this slide says is 50,000 plus worldwide. So this is a bit dated here. There's another program that NSA has. It's called Turbine, Project Turbine. And that's to take those yellow dots, which represented 50,000 pieces of malware around the world, and move it up to millions of people, millions of pieces of malware around the world. And again, that's what's needed if you're going to really launch a cyber attack. you really need to have malware everywhere, because you don't know where you might find the link to get you to where you're going to do the destruction and so forth. But at least on that happy note, I'm happy to take some questions. So that's sort of the future of NSA, the eavesdropping and the cyber warfare. Thank you. Yes, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bamford, for being here.
Yeah, sure. I guess I don't need this, but sure. Oh, here, this one's on here. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Sure.
It seems to me, in summary, that the NSA is a rogue organization. They act on their own accord. What are the prospects for just revoking their charter?
Well, I assume everybody heard that question. What's the NSA may be a rogue organization? What's the prospect of revoking their charter? It's a very interesting question, since NSA doesn't really have a charter. NSA, every agency in the country is formed pretty much the same way. A bill is proposed through Congress to create an agency, the Environmental Protection Agency or whatever. And then there's hearings, there's debates, there's a vote, goes through Congress. It's either voted up or down. If it's voted up, then it goes to the president for signature, becomes an agency. Well, NSA is the only, and that's how the CIA was created, and every other agency. The NSA is the only agency that didn't go through that. It wasn't ever created by Congress. It was never created publicly. It was created in absolute secrecy by Harry Truman in 1952. It was created by a 7-page memorandum signed by Harry Truman that was top secret. And Congress wasn't even allowed to know about the existence of NSA. Even NSA's name was top secret. It only eventually came out because of a few spy scandals. So NSA is this really curious agency. The CIA, for example, everybody that works at CIA almost has to write a book when they come out. At least it seems that way. With NSA, no employee has ever written a book coming out of NSA, because its laws and its secrecy is so much different. So in answer to your question, it wasn't formed legally. The Congress never really created it in the first place. So I don't know if there's any way to get rid of it, since they didn't create it. They can't stop it. I don't think anybody's planning on getting rid of NSA. I think it's going the opposite direction. NSA keeps getting more and more money and more power and more authority. The two people in the Congress that were pretty much adamant about putting brakes on NSA were Senator Wyden and Senator Udall. Well, Senator Udall isn't here anymore. And what was a Democratic Senate is now a Republican Senate. So it's going in the opposite direction. So unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be much chance in stopping NSA from doing what it's doing. It's got too much support because of all the hype over terrorism, which kills about 4 people in the United States a year. You know, it's about I don't know what coconuts are falling on people's heads, but there are 4 times as many dog bites that cause death in the United States. But we do need all this counterterrorism. Yes. Yes, sir.
Is it possible that the iPhone, see this iPhone?
Yeah.
While I'm not using it, it can listen and record what I'm talking now, right now?
As long as the battery's in there, yeah. You can...
even if it's not used, I put it in my pocket and
it makes no difference. It has a microphone in it and it has a camera in there. And if you have a battery in it, whether you turn it on or off, there are ways to actually turn it on secretly to listen to what you're doing.
I'm not using it.
Right. That's why there's these things now. I forgot the name of them, but there's these little Faraday packs. Yes, they're little little packages like big wallets that you put it in, and so if you're really worried about it, then you put it in there, and it keeps the signal from going anywhere, at least theoretically. But that's what NSA does. NSA, every time there's a new technology, their job is actually to find a way into it, and they do a very good job of it. And they get lots of money, and they have lots of people that are working on it. So, you know, and that's one of the problems with privacy is that NSA works very hard to get access. There's one slide I didn't put up here, but one of the projects that they've been working on that they actually succeeded in was trying to eavesdrop on all the communications in a particular country, all of it. And they did it in I think it was the Bahamas, I think, one of those islands. They were trying it out there, and it worked. They were able to get all the communications. And that was an idea that they wanted to see if they can do it with bigger countries, and they tried with, been trying with a few other countries now. So the idea is that that idea, collect it all, is still going on. So unfortunately, unless you do something about taking the battery out or putting it in a Faraday pack, it could be used as a remote microphone. Yes.
Here. Mr. Bamford, thank you very much for coming.
Sure.
I'm an adjunct professor in the political science department and the law school. And last year I had a major conference on privacy and national security and taught a seminar. We used The Shadow Factory as one of your books, so that might make you happy. In that book, you discuss at length the legal justification that was devised by John Yoo in the Office of Legal Counsel for this type of surveillance. And I'd appreciate it if you could discuss a little bit about the Bush administration's view of the powers of the president as commander-in-chief in this area, and whether or not the Obama administration has continued that particular point of view.
Yeah, good. Yeah, John Yoo, my former colleague up at Berkeley, we had slightly different viewpoints on a lot of things, including NSA and eavesdropping. But that was the idea. After 9/11, the Vice President Cheney pretty much wanted to change the way the NSA did its work. So he got Mike Hayden, the head of NSA, and they agreed that they would bypass the FISA Court. The legal basis that they came up with was it was the president's war on Al-Qaeda, the bill that was passed in Congress launching a war on Al-Qaeda. They used that as a justification, even though this was not active warfare going over and blowing up Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They used that as partial justification for bypassing the FISA Act. And they also used as justification the president's inherent power to protect the United States. You know, what's interesting was they came up with that argument, that legal argument, and they told NSA that, okay, you can start doing this now. You can start bypassing the FISA Court and so forth. And so we have legal authority now. We've got a legal decision. And then the general counsel for NSA and the director both asked to see the legal justification, and Cheney's office refused to let them to see it. I mean, this is absurd, but you're asking a federal agency to begin violating the law and eavesdropping on Americans, but they're not allowed to know the legal justification because they're not cleared for it or something. But that's sort of how it happened. And then after the New York Times pretty much exposed this, and then they pretty much just created a new law, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act, the FISA Amendments Act, in order to sort of legalize what they have been doing illegally. And that's where we are today, pretty much.
On my way here from the parking lot, trying to find my way here, I asked for help, and someone helped me find this location. And on the way here, he asked me, who are you going to see? And I said, James Bamford. And he said, who's he? And I explained your interest in the NSA and the things you've written. And he stopped for a moment and asked, how come he's not in jail? And I couldn't answer them. So I'm wondering, you had a slide up there that showed a number of people who have been whistleblowers and they've been harassed by the government and prosecuted and whatnot. And I was wondering how you've been able to navigate your way through this maze of an agency that used to be called No Such Agency.
Yeah, actually, it was funny when I was with Snowden. I told him I'd met a few people up at NSA recently, and they said that was the old joke. It used to be NSA stood for No Such Agency or Never Say Anything, and now the joke is that NSA stands for Not Secret Anymore. Yeah, I didn't actually escape. They did threaten me with prosecution twice in writing the Puzzle Palace, largely because I had gotten that document I showed, the one that showed that the NSA had come under criminal investigation. I actually got it from the Freedom of Information Act from the Justice Department. They released it to me. And I assumed the NSA, knew that they released it to me since it was basically NSA's criminal file. And, but NSA didn't know about it. And I talked to the people at the Justice Department. They said, well, this is our policy. If you ask for a criminal file on John Gotti, we wouldn't ask John Gotti for permission to give it to you. So they use that justification, which I thought was pretty unique. And so the NSA had no idea I'd gotten it. And then when they found out I had gotten it, they all of a sudden called me up and said, actually the Justice Department called me up and said, we'd like to have a meeting with you. Well, at that point, I decided to get a lawyer, and I got a good lawyer from the ACLU, and we went down to the meeting in Washington, and it was very interesting. They spent like an hour saying why that should never have been released, and I was taking all kinds of notes. Very interesting. And then they said, well, now we'd like to have you give it back to us. And I was really enjoying getting all this information, so I said, actually, we need another meeting to discuss this a little bit further. And since I came all the way to Washington to discuss this, I think, you should come up to Boston and then have the next meeting up there. And so they agreed, and they had the General Counsel of NSA, the head of policy for NSA, and the Assistant Attorney General fly up to Boston to meet in my publisher, Hope Mifflin's conference room. And my lawyer wasn't able to come. He had some emergency case, and so I was there by myself with these guys in the conference room. And so they weren't as pleasant this time. They started demanding things like, how many copies have you made? Who's seen copies? Who have you given copies to? I said, well, none of that's on the agenda today, so you're going to have to ask my lawyer. And there's the phone. Go call him up and ask him if you can even ask me those questions. And if he says okay, then I'll answer them. So he called up Mark Lynch, my lawyer, and the Deputy Attorney General and or Assistant Attorney General. And it wasn't sounding very good. They were bringing up the espionage statute and everything else. Because there is this one little part of the espionage statute that says if you incidentally come into possession of classified information and refuse to give it back to the proper custodians, like you could be charged under espionage, just like they're going after Snowden. And so Mark Lynch has said to the Attorney General guy, the Assistant Attorney General, look, put the phone back on its side, go outside the conference room and tell Bamford I'd like to speak to him. So I got on the phone. He said, they're really getting in over your head. They could have a warrant for your arrest in their pocket. They could have a subpoena or a temporary restraining order or injunction, any kind of legal document. So my advice is put the phone back on its side, go out and tell them I want to talk to them, and as they're walking in, you just disappear. So that's what I did. I just disappeared. And so they sort of had to find their way back out of the Hope Mifflin, and then they got back to Washington. They began sending me letters saying you are currently in possession of classified documents and we demand the return. And we found a loophole in there was a thing called the Executive Order on Secrecy, and it said once a document's been declassified, it can't be reclassified. So we would send that a letter back to them saying, look, that document had been declassified and you can't reclassify it according to this executive order. So then it went up to President Reagan at the time to the White House. And Reagan changed the executive order to say once a document's been declassified, it can be reclassified. But my favorite legal phrase is ex post facto. You know, they couldn't go backwards to charge me. So I was free because they didn't have a law. I mean, I didn't break any law because there wasn't any law that on the books at the time. Afterwards, there was. So if afterwards I had gotten the document and I refused to give it, they could have charged me. So, but since then, they've sort of left me alone. It's been sort of a détente. You know, I don't. I can write about them, and but they can't come after me because I haven't broken any laws. So, good question. Now, yes.
I just watched Citizen4, so it'll be interesting to see your interviews following that. But it reminded me when Snowden was first being sort of followed by the NSA to try to arrest him, that there must be hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have the kind of access he had. And so the secrecy of this seems completely impossible at that scale. And basically, I think what you say and what the lawyers say is that you get buried in legal bureaucracy as a means to kind of undo anything that might legally be exposed by a whistleblower, or else why aren't there more people exposing what's going on in the NSA? But one of the things that occurred to me as I was watching the Citizen4 is, how is it that the foreign governments who would be so, unbelievably astounded by this and insulted by it and humiliated by it and spied on by it, why are they not organized in some way to go against the NSA? I mean, I'm trying to think of who else would be in the world that would try to limit the NSA's power. They would seem like an obvious source. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, a couple of things on Citizen4 was the film produced by Laura Poitras about Snowden. Matter of fact, I was just at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library in Boston. I gave a talk after it, commenting on the film, and that is one of the things you just mentioned. Was I thought one of the most interesting aspects of this is the fact that Snowden never actually worked for the NSA. I mean, he was never an NSA employee. He was a contractor. He was working for Booz Allen at the end, and then Dell Computer before that. So this is a person who never was even an NSA employee, and he was able to, according to the government, get out 1.7 million documents. And NSA didn't even know about it until he revealed it himself in Hong Kong. So that should get everybody very worried, because they've got all your information. They've got all your cell phone connections, everybody that you've called or called you. They've got all this data and the ability to get all this other data. And yet they can't, they do such a poor job of actually keeping it secure that some lowly contractor can basically walk out the door with almost 2 million pieces of that of the most highest classification of those communications. In terms of other countries, I didn't get into this. I didn't have enough time to get into it. But it's not just NSA. NSA is just one agency. It's actually a collective. It's called the Five Eyes. It's the NSA. It's the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. They all form a collective. So what they did is they all worked together during World War II to help win World War II, and then after World War II, during the Cold War, they got together and wanted to continue this. So they divided up the world in terms of spheres of influence. So the United States can eavesdrop on South America very well because of our geography. GCHQ, that's the British NSA, could eavesdrop on Europe because of its location and so forth. So they divide up the world to who can eavesdrop where, and then they share all that information. So it's this collective sharing. So you're not just talking about NSA, you're talking about the Five Eyes, although I don't know why they call it, they should be called the 10 Ears instead of the Five Eyes. But you've got all these agencies that collaborate together to eavesdrop and then share all the information. In terms of countries going against it, the Chinese are I don't think anybody is even close to the NSA, but the Chinese are working hard on it. The Russians work fairly hard on it, and so forth. But in terms of scale, I don't think anything matches the NSA or the Five Eyes.
Hi. This is maybe a silly question, but for the Cyber Army and the Cyber Navy and the Cyber Air Force, what's the difference? I mean,
well, the difference is that the Cyber Navy is designed to develop cyber attacks against naval vessels or anything that involves the sea. And Cyber Air Force is designed to attack anything that's in the air or in space, and the Cyber Army is designed to launch cyber attacks against anything on the ground. So they each have their domain, and they each say that we're going to dominate that domain, that internet domain. So they each have their own job to focus on. There's even a Cyber Marines too. I guess they go after foreign Marines or something.
In responding to the question about the justification for the surveillance that was given by the Bush administration, you sort of referenced something which I think might have been the AUMF, the authorization to use military force.
Exactly. Yeah,
and I was just curious, now that there's a new AUMF being proposed by Obama for attacking ISIS, if there's any indication in documents or anything surrounding it that future justifications might be buried in that might be expanding things.
Well, you never know. They right now, all they're doing is asking for another similar type of an order, but I haven't heard them using it. You know, there's so many laws that have been changed. They created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act, which sort of gave legal authority to doing a lot of the things they were originally doing under the previous, I don't know why I keep forgetting the name of the act. Yeah, the AUMF. But I wouldn't be surprised. The Obama administration has had a terrible record in terms of privacy and in terms of the use of NSA and so forth. I mean, my opinion is that Obama came into office with one goal. Winning re-election, and the way you win re-election is you give your followers, who you have to keep following you, the domestic policy, which is health care, gay rights, all that. But then he pretty much gave to get over the top, over the 50%, you need to bring in the blue dog Democrats and the Republicans and conservatives and so forth. So he pretty much gave them the foreign policy. You know, George Bush only had one drone attack in Yemen in 8 years. And Obama's had constant drone attacks. And same thing with the eavesdropping. He turned the whole thing over to John Brennan to run the intelligence community, and we pretty much had the same policies under the Bush administration. So, I wouldn't be... supposedly, according to the State of the Union last night, he's supposed to come out next month with some kind of a report saying how he's going to rectify the privacy issues with the NSA. So we'll have to wait and see, but I don't have a lot of hope, because he originally created this presidential commission, which was not screaming liberals. I mean, they had the former director or deputy director of the CIA on it, and they all concluded that there should be 46 areas that should be changed within the NSA. I think they've only changed about 6 out of that. So reform isn't, I don't see a lot of reform on the horizon here, but we'll wait and see what this new report has to say.
I was wondering what you see as the outlook for cybersecurity for non-state actors, universities, NGOs, corporations. Do you see a continuing trend to strong crypto, a move away from networked systems, anything like that?
It's a little bit out of my area, so I'm not really sure what the future would be. But in terms of just overall, I mean, that was one of the things that Snowden kept emphasizing when I was with him, is that people should get, people and universities and corporations, so forth, more and more into encryption. Journalists, I've been a journalist all my life, and I didn't get into encryption until a couple of years ago. So it's a new world for a lot of people, including me. A lot of people go into journalism because they they can't figure algebra out. They're not into heavy sciences. So so getting journalists to do this was a major event. That's why if you watch the movie Citizen 4, you can see that Snowden tried constantly to get in touch with Glenn Greenwald, and Greenwald kept pushing him off because Snowden kept saying, "We have to get encryption, or I can't communicate with you." And Greenwald had nothing; he wanted nothing to do with that, and that's why he eventually got in touch with Laura Poitras, who did know about encryption, and then she got Greenwald to get in encryption. So it's like pulling teeth for even journalists to get into encryption, but that is sort of the next wave, is to move the country or the world, whatever you want to, however you want to focus, more into encryption. Because once everybody gets into encryption, or once there's sort of end-to-end encryption better than it is today, then it's much more difficult for the NSA to focus on everybody. Then they'll just have to focus on the key targets, the people that they should be focusing on, not everybody sitting in this room and everybody in this country. So it's probably not a great answer to your question, but I think that's where the universities have to go, is to move more and more to thinking about privacy and how they can protect the privacy of the students and the faculty and everybody else. And encryption is one of the key ways to begin doing that.
How is money allocated to the NSA? In other words, do we have an idea what their budget is? Is it a line item in the congressional budget, part of the Department of Defense? And how much money are we talking about?
Yeah, there's dump trucks that line up all the way down the Baltimore Washington Parkway, and they just dump money on their front yard. That's pretty much how they've been doing it ever since 9/11. NSA has been getting enormous amounts of money. The annual budget for the intelligence community is about $50-something billion. NSA is a little bit more than $10 billion just for the NSA. The CIA actually gets more. They would get around $15 billion. They always used to get less than NSA, but now because of all these drones they keep buying, they're up to about $15 billion. And those figures don't really count the cost of putting satellites up there. NSA has to put a lot of satellites up there to collect all that. And a lot of that budget goes to another agency called the National Reconnaissance Office. So it's a great deal of money. NSA comes under the Department of Defense. People don't realize it, but it's actually the Secretary of Defense that really controls most of the intelligence in the country. It's an enormous amount of money that's going to them, and the problem is that it'll constantly go to them, and it has been constantly going to them, enormous amounts of money, because when you get into politics, if you're a congressperson or whatever, and you're in Congress and a bill is coming up, and it's a bill that you're either going to cut back on NSA or give them more money or whatever. Well, you got two choices, cut back or give them more money. Well, if you're thinking of running again and you decide to cut back on them, and then there's the Boston Marathon bombing or whatever, something event, your opponent is going to charge you in the next election with being weak on terrorism. They hate those three words, weak on terrorism. It's almost like don't even bother to run. So when you have that choice, it's almost a no-brainer for a lot of these people, because there's really no detriment to voting for the money. Your opponent isn't going to say, he voted for more money from the NSA. I mean, how many votes is he going to lose there? But if he votes to say, he weakened terrorism, so the next event is going to happen here because of him, that's a big fear. So that's why you get the Congress that constantly votes to give NSA more money and more authority. It's this fear-mongering over terrorism. You know, until you stop that and the nonsense over terrorism, they're going to keep getting more and more money because of the fear factor. Yes.
So can you talk about the cyber corporations, Googles, Yahoos, and all those? They're spying on us. They're taking our doing data mining. And a second part of that, what are our rights? Our rights to defend ourselves, not to be spied on.
Well, yeah, that's the other side of the coin here. I've been talking about the NSA, government eavesdropping. The other side of the coin is commercial eavesdropping. And there are a couple differences. One of them is, you know, if you don't want Facebook to spy on you, don't join Facebook or don't send a Google request. So it is voluntary to some degree. And the other thing is that Google and Yahoo can't put you in jail, or they can't put you on the do not fly list. So there are big differences between what a commercial data collection company can do and what the government can do. But that said, once the commercial companies collect all that information, they use it obviously for making money, for whatever purposes they can use it for to make money. At the same time, as I showed you, they had this, NSA has these operations like the Prism program and the Muscular program, where they legally and illegally tap into all that data that the companies have. So, you know, you're faced with sort of a bad choice either way. The only way is to become a Luddite and disconnect from everything, which is very impractical for most people. In terms of your legal protections, it's very difficult with the companies. You're basically signing your rights for them to do whatever they want with your information, and so you know, you either play by their rules or you don't play. That's the problem. I think there has to be more effort on the private sector. Again, that's not my area. I've been focusing on the government sector, but there's got to be more efforts on the private sector to get these and EPIC and organizations like that do a very good job at doing that, at pressuring the public and the corporations to have more laws and rules that will protect the people, protect the public from companies like that. I mean, you have to also look at this change in society. I mean, when in the 60s and 70s and so forth, there was a far more, I think, attention to privacy back in those days, and now it's more digital exposition. You know, to get as much about yourself as possible on the internet through Facebook or whatever. So it's much harder to get people to take privacy seriously when there's such an effort to get as much about your life onto the internet as possible. So you're confronting that problem as well. So anyway, it's groups like your privacy organization here, groups like EPIC that really need a lot more support and are very important today.
Jim, thank you. We will not take 30 years to get you back here again.
Thank you.
This is exactly why we called it a conversation with you, and I think you've raised the array of issues and then some that the campus has been concerned about, and I think you've given us all much to chew on about the work we have to do. And I can tell you that getting universities to encrypt is at least as hard as getting journalists to encrypt. It's one of the things that we are dealing with on this campus, and it's a very, very hard problem. We have a lovely reception that Kent will point you to, and Jim will be around for a while to continue the conversation. So please join us, and thank you, Jim, again.
Great. Thanks, Christina. Appreciate it. Thank you.